that meant that you would wake up and Fajr in the masjid was pretty much standard. So there's a 5x differential between Muslims and the average person in the world. That's how far behind the Muslim community is. So you've got this small country that was like North Korea 60, 70 years ago or 80 years ago, and it's now producing things that are literally our interface with the world. We need to be focusing on solving real problems and the biggest problems, because the harder the problem is, the more value you're going to be able to generate out of it. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here. Warwick University, I was telling the brother, was one of the 5 places that I applied to when I was going for university as well, for PPE. So in another life, it could have been that I was an alumnus, but it wasn't to be. So it is what it is. I also want to apologize because I normally wouldn't take a call at the point where I'm supposed to be speaking, but it was HMRC. And so I prioritize HMRC above all else, just below God. So that's an explanation of that. Let's begin. So we are living through unprecedented times, and there's lots of people who are not very happy with the UK right now. There's a lot of people who are not very happy with the old cities, and a lot of people are a lot more footloose and thinking about moving around. So my question to you is, what city would you like to live in? If you could just wave a magic wand, money was no object, and you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live? Go on, you're looking very happy. No. Well, we can come to you as well. But this guy, yeah, you, yeah. What's that? Medina, smashed it. All right. So the bar has been set very high. Let's get the other one out of the way as well. Then go on. Say Makkah, someone. Okay. So Medina, Makkah, we've done. Whereabouts else? What's that? Qatar. I thought you said Greater London. Okay. So Qatar. Where else are we? Any from the ladies? Or do you all want to stay in Warwick for the rest of your life? No? All right.
Bangalore.
What?
Bangalore.
Magaluf. Bangalore. I was going to say Magaluf is quite. I know. I heard Magaluf as well. That's all right. What happens in this room stays in this room. It's a safe space. Okay. So we've had a number of different options. Why Bangalore?
That's where I'm from.
Okay. Fine. Why Qatar? Who said Qatar?
I think I went there once. It's just there's a lot of need there, but there's very high demand there, but also it's got a lot of the good aspects of Dubai without all the hustle and bustle and all of the westernization.
Interesting. And why Medina? The brother who said Medina.
Oh, because if I was to pass away, then I'd be protected from the day of judgment.
Solid. Good answer. Okay, so the reason why I ask that is because there are certain cities in the world, and all of these cities you will all have heard of. There are certain cities in the world that have an incredible pull to them, and they are these hubs of civilization. There are these hubs of jobs. There are hubs of where money flows through as well, and I know all of you have said lots of different names, but the reality is pretty much all of you in this room will at some point, I think, be working in either one of London, Dubai, potentially New York, or if you stay in the UK, then somewhere like Birmingham, Manchester. It's just an inevitability that if you are working in some kind of corporate, you're going to be touching base at one or all of these different cities. And these are cities that are now the cradles of civilization, or maybe not the cradles, but they are the hubs of where a lot of stuff happens. And I want to take you back to Baghdad. So this is now Baghdad back in the 7th and 8th, around let's say the 8th century. And Baghdad at that point was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, capitals of education, capitals of employment. That was where the big arteries of trade, of knowledge, of data passed through. It was effectively the London or the New York or arguably the Dubai of that time. And Baghdad had around 1% of the world's population. Any ideas on what the world's population was at that time? So I looked it up, and it was around 200 to 250 million people. So the world was a different place back then. We've had this huge exponential spike ever since. And at that point, Baghdad had about 1% of the entire world's population within it. And this is the place where, hands up who, this is a silly question, but I'll ask it anyway. Hands up who doesn't speak English. Okay, so everyone speaks English, because otherwise this would be a complete waste of your time, right? And the reason why, and hands up who was born not speaking English at home. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of people who were born like that, right? And then you learnt English. And the reason why you probably learnt English was perhaps in part because you live in the UK, but also because this is the language of schooling. This is the language of the internet. This is the language of knowledge. This is the language of culture when we're thinking about films and literature and the major newspapers of the world. This is that language. And so you learn this language to be able to access this. And even someone who lives abroad, you come from Bangalore, and I guess there's a whole colonial past to it, right? Why English is there. But you had to learn the language, and if someone doesn't learn the language, they can't really access a place like this. And in that period of time, people would learn Arabic to be able to access the same kinds of knowledge. So the Warwick University of the 8th century wasn't in Warwick, in Coventry, it was in Baghdad. And the kind of places that we're talking about are places like Bayt al-Hikmah, which is this big central institution, this library, this melting pot of scientists and scholars. And the head of that institution was a guy called Ibn Ishaq, who was actually a Christian. He was a Christian scholar, translator, polymath. And the Muslim civilization at that point felt so confident that they were happy to put in charge someone who was a Christian. And it kind of sometimes blows people's minds that you would have a Muslim civilization, Muslim country, or at that point Khilafah, that had someone in such a critical position who was actually non-Muslim. But you find that throughout Islamic history, you have non-Muslims at very, very critical places, because they come to that city, they come to that Khilafah or that civilization, because they see that as where all of the action is taking place, and the civilization is confident in itself, so that it's able to appoint these people to the top as well. So if we carry on, as you can see, Baghdad was in this kind of concentric circles, and it was known to be an absolutely incredible place. Now, this is where we were back in the 9th century. I got it wrong, it's not the 8th, in the 9th century. This is where we were back then. And at that point, we had people who were living in environments that were focused around, if you look at it, it was focused around the masjid, or this focused around key things that are symbols of Islam, and there are symbols of the kind of morality that we want to buy into. And that meant that you would wake up, and Fajr in the masjid was pretty much standard. That meant that your cadence of your daily life was in and around the masjid, because that's just how it was constructed. That meant that you grew up with a certain ethics where family was really important. That meant that you grew up in an environment where culturally, your entertainment wasn't Kim Kardashian or, I don't know, Taylor Swift. Your entertainment was something that was much more wholesome, I guess like a early predecessor of Ertugrul or something. And that is really important. Any ideas why that's important? Like, why is what you consume in entertainment so important? Yeah, go on.
Your subconscious beliefs and your, I think, the kind of inspiration and guidance you get.
Yeah.
Pushes you towards like certain stereotypes. So I think, for example, being around family and understanding those values. In the UK, you might feel like you're fighting a battle, but over there, maybe you're learning something and you're falling in line with something you understand.
Fantastic. What do you study?
Computer science and maths.
Oh my God, you're wasted, honestly. So you're exactly right. Effectively, our culture, our language programs the way we think and how we see the world. To get like kind of philosophical at this point, we have this apparatus, this biological and mental apparatus, and that is, it's malleable at the start of our lives. And then over time, experiences and knowledge and the dialectic of data in, data out, and sensory inputs actually then forms the mind that we have. And which is a very long way of saying you are a product of your history. And so we've got this mind that is now formed, and the formation of that mind necessarily will affect how you behave. And I will tell you who has programmed your mind. It is, anyone heard of J.K. Rowling? Yeah? Dick King-Smith? R.L. Stein? Yeah? No? All right, missed out. Mallory Blackman? Yeah? So these are the people that have programmed your minds and my minds. Or Steven Spielberg, if you want to go into the film genre, or Peter Jackson. These are the people that set the narratives, and we think in narratives. As human beings, we all think in narratives, because when a child comes across a fire and the child touches the fire for the first time, the child gets burnt, and then he learns, or she learns, that there is a cause and effect to this, and therefore I should stay away from it. And cause and effect is really just a primitive way of saying stories. If this happens, this is who this is, then that will happen, this is where you will end up. And that's how we learn how the world works. That's how we learn morality. That's how we learn what we should be behaving as. And so culture, and this is where I'm coming back to the point around culture and academia, all of this is so important because at the moment we have handed over the keys to the mental mapping over to people who perhaps we may not necessarily want to hand that over to. And it affects all of us. And I'm no different. We live in the world where we live in today. And then, of course, finally, from an economic perspective, this was the center of a huge amount of commerce and trade, and was the preponderant and strongest polity, the strongest grouping across the world, or one of the strongest, and remains so for several centuries onwards. Now, a caveat at this point, and of course, like the whole premise of this examination is how can we help the Muslim community financially level up? And the approach that we're taking here is really hopefully quite a scientific one, which is that from a secular perspective, there is a group of people, and I will talk about it in a second, called the Muslim community. It's about 15 to 20% of the world's population, and they are currently performing at a suboptimal level. And we want to try and raise that barrier, that bar, a lot higher. And then from a spiritual perspective, إن الله كتب الإحسان على كل شيء فإذا ذبحتم فأحسنوا الذبح فإذا قتلتم فأحسنوا قتل أو كما قال. And in the spiritual sense, we need to make sure that we are striving for ihsan in absolutely everything. And Allah subhanahu Prophet ﷺ, he says that even when you do zabiha, or even when you are fighting, then you need to be perfecting that. So even things that are very gory and messy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that you should be striving for perfection and ihsan and completeness in those things. So then, of course, we should be doing that when it comes to the, our economic affairs and the way that we think about the world as a whole. So that's the approach, with which, and that's the question, and that's the approach which we are taking. So if we carry on now, unfortunately, that was then, and today it's very different. So today, as a community, the average net worth of, what do you think is the average net worth of an individual in the UK, in the world, in dollars? Average net worth. It's in the thousands. Go on. 5,000, all right. Any advances on 5,000, 5,000, 5,000, 5,000? Go on. Well, go on. 3,000. 3 advances, man. Higher. Go on. What? 15. No, it's higher. 30. All right. Bids with 30. Anyone ahead of 30? What's that?
35.
No, you have to go higher. Quick, faster.
36.
No. 60, you're getting there. 80,000. So $80,000 is the average net worth of the average human being across the world. And this is obviously an average. So you'll have some people who are mega rich, some people who are a lot poorer, but that's roughly the average. Now, we worked out the average of the Muslim community, looking at the different populations across the world, and the average there was $16,000. So there's a 5x differential between Muslims and the average person in the world. That's how far behind the Muslim community is. And we, of course, need to change that, and this is the whole discussion that we're going to have today. Muslim companies in the top 100, so at the time I initially did this, there was no companies. There is now one company. Any guesses which company that is? Aramco, right? So it's even that company is not necessarily because of all the hard work that they have done, it's more because they were just sat on oil. And there is a second company as well in the top 200. Any guesses for that? Nah, not yet. But you get brownie points for that. It's Sabic, which is an offshoot of Aramco, which deals with oil and gas and processing. So we have 2 companies in the top 100, and neither of them are net positive, arguably, for the world. And so that's where we are. But where we should be, of course, is out of 200, we should have at least 40, presumably, proportionate to our population size. But unfortunately, we don't have that. Nobel Peace Prizes, the same thing, 12 prizes, and 7 of them were peace prizes. Now, of course, we don't undermine peace prizes completely, although there is a good argument for that as well. But the fact that there's only 5 substantive prizes going on is not necessarily a good look. Now, you could argue that the Nobel system as a whole, we don't like that, but that's a separate story. Now, out of the 950 people who have been given Nobel Peace Prizes or Nobel Prizes, from other communities, such as, let's say, the Jewish community, there has been 180 who have had the Nobel Prize. So compare that to the Muslim community's output in recent years, I think that's, by any stretch, that's not a particularly good look. And then the top 100 films, again, I talk about culture and academia, I think that's really important. We've had 2 from the last 100 years, and they were both actually Iranian films, funnily enough, which was news to me. So if we carry on, so we've got this setup, and I'd invite you to think about a taxonomy of 4 different, quadrants that we think about the world as a whole through. One is politics, the other end is economics, and then you've got culture, and then you've got spirituality. And right now, as a political grouping, the Muslim community, we're pretty weak, we're pretty divided. We've got a lot of superpower interference in Muslim countries. I don't think that's controversial to say. Economically, unfortunately, we are from amongst the poorest in the world. We have a tendency towards rent seeking. And what I mean by that is, rather than, so let's say you've got a pot of £100, and what's your name? Muhammad. So Muhammad's got a pot of £100. What's your name? Salman. Okay, so Salman, apologies, you're going to be the non-Muslim kind of mainstream. And Muhammad, you are the average person, let's say, in the Middle East. Now, Muhammad's wealth is going to be much more towards income, savings accounts, maybe he has some property. That's kind of where his wealth is if he's investing. So he's just kind of holding it in cash and relatively low risk, renting, activities, either getting rent or getting a savings account profit, which is still in that kind of rent bucket. Salman, on the other hand, is investing much more broadly. He's investing a lot more in the public markets. He might be investing in private equity, venture capital. He's investing a lot more in enterprise. And enterprise is another word for companies, which is another word for things that solve problems, things that solve material problems that people have in the world. And so long term, what's going to end up happening is Salman is going to just do a lot better because he is taking a little bit more risk, and he's also genuinely trying to address a whole bunch of problems that the world has as a whole. And unfortunately, Muhammad is going to lose out because he is engaged in rentier economies, which isn't as effective. And then culturally, I think it's pretty clear where we are today, unfortunately. And then from a spiritual perspective as well, most of us, we read the Quran, but we don't really understand it. We may do salah, and we don't understand it. I mean, that's, as a side point, if that's you, you don't need to stick your hand up, but if that is you, then what you should do tonight is go and learn the meaning of the salah, because you're doing that 5 times a day, for heaven's sake, right? If you don't know the meaning of that, then what are you doing? You might as well just go and do yoga instead. So that's where we are as a community, unfortunately. And we as a community, even our ethics and our culture has become this homogenized mix of what the what the urban English-speaking internet, Reddit, cosmopolitan elite believe. That's what we are. That's where we are right now. It doesn't matter if we're sat in Warwick or if we're sat in Florida. There are similarities that, because of just the vast nature of the internet and how you've got these economies of scale and certain things rise to the top. Because that has now become very homogenized, we are all the same in terms of how we behave and we think as well. So that's where we are from a spiritual and cultural perspective as well. So if we carry on, we need to change things around, right, guys? So this is the bit of the presentation where we now start thinking, okay, economically, how we're going to change this. So if we go back, politics, economics, spiritual, and culture, we're not really going to talk about the other 3. We're going to talk mainly about the economic bit, because that's where I've done a lot of thinking and can say half sensible things, hopefully. The other things I will leave to your imaginations and for your, your research to progress on. But if we take a look at how the world has developed from a historical perspective when it comes to technology, you can see very, very clearly how at each stage where there has been a major technology that has been introduced, such as, for example, the introduction of the wheel at a certain point, or the agricultural revolution where we went from nomads to settling down in a particular area because we worked out how to do that, or where we had things like maths kicking in, and that's where the Greeks and Romans came into their own, or when we had the Industrial Revolution, or the discovery of paper, and for the first time people could actually write down information and spread it in a much more viral way. That was like the first Facebook, right? Paper, much more viral way than it was ever done before. So these were key points that changed the trajectory of certain civilizations. And so the bottom line is, and as you can see, the clumping has only increased over time, where especially over the last, I'd say, 50 to 80 years, there's this compounding and acceleration effect that happens with technology. We have just started skyrocketing. But the punchline here is that technology is one of the key aspects to how a civilization can quickly change the direction it is going in. And here you can see a really interesting study by Ray Dalio. I'd encourage you to read the book as well. He's written a book on this subject, just like looking at some of these pictures. So you've got the great empires, all the different empires that are listed there. The UK went well, and then it collapsed. And then we've got China going on a bit of a tear at the moment. And then the USA came out of nowhere, and then it skyrocketed. It's still at the top, but it is now on the decline. And as you can see on the bottom right, you can see that very clearly. The Dutch, the British, then the US, and now China is on the rise. And that's going to play out over the next 100 years or so. What's really fascinating is that these empires, they start with education, and then you have innovation, then you have competitiveness, then you have the military, and then you have trade. After that, you have output, and then finally you have the financial center, and then you have the reserve status of the currency as well. So these are the moves that are made, but very, very clearly, as you can see, education is absolutely at the forefront, and innovation and technology are absolutely at the forefront of what is causing this thing to happen. And as you can see, there's a lag here, where there's a big lag between that and ultimately the output. So output is just stuff that is produced. That is the bit where the money starts coming in, but you can see the output comes usually a lot later, and it can take 20 to 30 years of this, as you can see the years at the bottom. And then there's like a really interesting story about where the big cycle is and where we are right now. And there is an argument here that he's making that, look, we have been printing money, we've had a financial bust, we've had some overstretches, and we're now printing money in credit. There are potentially now situations where revolutions and wars are in the offing or happening, and then there's debt and political restructuring that could and potentially will be happening. And then there is this new dawn, right, where things are going to change. And we are slowly, very glacially, in this period of time where I believe we are seeing that happen live. And this is actually a moment, whenever you've got ruptures in the world and then a reknitting of the world's fabric, this is a moment of great opportunity where if we play our cards right as individuals, but hopefully as a community as well, then we can A, help the world materially with the problems that the world is facing, such as climate change and other things like that. But then also it can mean that it's this galvanizing effect that can actually help lift us as individuals, but also as a community, and take advantage of the next big wave or the next big shifts that are coming. So let's talk a little bit about some of the success stories that we've had in the past, because they're really instructive in terms of how we can learn from them and potentially implement them. So when it comes to South Korea, so South Korea was roughly the same economic output, and it was doing as well as North Korea just after the World War. So that was where both of these countries were. But then what South Korea did was really interesting. They started investing heavily in technologies, R&D technologies. And today, you can see the graph. Today they have accelerated enormously as a result of that, to the extent that you have people in this room. I mean, I have a Samsung phone. Any Samsung users here? All right, half of the group, and then I presume the other half is iPhone. And there's probably one person with a Google somewhere. My commiserations. So you've got this small country that was like North Korea 60, 70 years ago or 80 years ago, and it's now producing things that are literally our interface with the world. And half of us are holding that phone in our hands. That's the power of what they have managed to achieve in a very short period of time. Even culturally, we saw that they've been winning Oscars, and they've a huge amount of film output as well, right, on Netflix and on the internet. South Korean film is now a thing. K-pop is a thing as well, right? You've got them taking over from a musical perspective as well. So Koreans have been smashing it. And then you have another success story, which is Silicon Valley. So before, back in the day, Silicon Valley wasn't really a thing. It used to have large companies that were in America at the time: General Motors, Ford, IBM, Exxon, GE, General Electric. These were much more focused towards manufacture. This was the old school industries. And then you fast forward to today, and some of the largest companies in the world, but certainly in America, are tech companies. And this is actually out of date now, because I would imagine now it's Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft, and Amazon, I think, would still be on there, and then Google would be on there as well. So it's pretty much all tech companies at this point. And there's a reason for that, and that reason is called Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley is a place that is the richest place in the world, second only to Geneva, which is where all the black money goes and hides. So they can't really compete with that, but they can compete with everything else. So Silicon Valley is this huge, conduit of where pretty much all of our data is bouncing around via Silicon Valley even now. And they've done a whole bunch of things that are really successful. So they've gone very heavily again towards technology, but it's been a different flavor of technology. It's technology that's through the lens of venture capital. Early stage tech startups, that's kind of the approach they've taken, as opposed to a government-led technology that was where Korea came in. And they've created this incredible industry where you've got a huge amounts of success and successful companies knocking around. That then creates a know-how on how you can create another company like this as well. And that then creates the kind of money that is needed, because a lot of this creates a lot of profits, that can then be reinvested into the same cycle. You get people in America where if you have a mad idea, they will actually back you, right? And they will allow you to do it. Because if someone said to you that I'm going to create a website where you can share pictures and people will just go on the website to look at pictures, you'd be like, if you were in the UK, you would get laughed out of the room. They'd be like, no, jog on and come back with something like like a car or something, and we'll believe you. But people in America, they back that stuff, and today, of course, that's Instagram. And Twitter, I mean, for heaven's sake, what on earth is Twitter/X? If someone came to you and said, I'm going to create a website where someone can just say rubbish, but they're only limited to about 140 characters, and that's going to be huge, and it's going to be a multi-billion pound company, would you back them? Many people in this room probably wouldn't, but these mad people in Silicon Valley did, and they made a whole load of money off it. And so that's the culture that they've created in Silicon Valley, which is hugely beneficial. And then we've got Germany, which is, again, out of the World War, absolutely destroyed post-World War, but then they came back and they used, again, a lot of investment into more old-school technology, and particularly the car industry and the heavy industries as well. And they've created a whole bunch of things that we still, many of us, are using to this day. And then Israel, and of course, this is a country that is very much in the news at the moment, and we despise it. But it has something for us to learn from as well, which is that over the last 75 years of its existence, it has become one of the top 25 to 30 economies in the world. And sure, it has had a lot of help from particularly the USA in getting there, but it has also been because of this culture of investing in technology, this culture of hard work, waking up early, hitting the grind, doing the running and the exercise in the morning, and then going to work. This culture is trained into them by doing stints in the Israeli military, and the results are very obvious. You have a large amount of tech companies that have been produced out of Israel, and in fact, many of us, either knowingly or unwittingly, end up using those technologies as well. And in fact, at this point, they are so integral that it's very hard to extricate ourselves. Even if we wanted to boycott, the Israel tech sector, it's very hard to do that. And so, that's what this country managed to achieve, very small country, over the last 75 years or so. So, the key ingredients, therefore, for a revival of our community, of the Muslim Ummah, whatever you want to call it, is political, economic, cultural, and spiritual. Now, from a political perspective, I'm not going to belabor all of these points, but I'm going to particularly focus on the economic bit. we need to, of course, try and get to some level of unification amongst the Muslim community, amongst the Muslim states. All of this sectarianism that we've got going on about, Shias and Sunnis and Sufis and Barelwis and Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and Super Salafis, all of that we need to just throw out into the bin, because that's not the way of our Prophet. That's not the way of the Muslims. A lot of these details seem important to us at a certain, everyone goes through this curve, right? I don't know if many of you actually go through at university, where you become really religious, and you'll probably have this where a friend of yours has suddenly become like properly on it, and he's now pulling you up on, the where your sock is, and where your ankles, your trousers end, how you're wearing your scarf, what scarf you're wearing. There's like a full analysis on, whether or not, what sound constitutes music, what sound doesn't constitute music. This is a very deep and philosophical debate. And apparently there's a book that Khidr was telling me that a scholar has written about 500 pages, right? 500 pages in dense academic Arabic on music. You'll have to read it to find out what he says. So we have people like that out there. So you kind of go on this journey. I've completely lost the point of what I was trying to get to here. Unification, that was it. So we need to be united, and we shouldn't be judging each other, and we shouldn't be sectarian. But unfortunately, that's at the heart of a lot of the issues that sometimes face our community. Then we need to have rule of law, peace in the Middle East, end of the reliance on foreign powers, particularly for small Muslim countries. I think that's, each country, in order for it to properly flourish, needs to be able to be on its own 2 feet. And that's all I'll say about the political side. On the spiritual side, we all need to be able to speak and understand Arabic. We all should have a connection with the Quran, ideally having memorized the Quran if we can. We should all have a base level Islamic knowledge about what we need to do on our day-to-day. The stuff that we now call our Alamiya was historically what was just the base level for the average Muslim. And so we need to make sure that we're hitting that and we know what's going on. And then we need to make sure that our salah is done on time, like really basic stuff. And I say this to myself first, doing your salah on time, doing it with meaning, doing it on time in the masjid, doing it in jama'ah. These are the kind of simple things that we need to be doing in order for us to move forward. And if you notice, it's a quadrant, so you can't just miss out one of these, because that's what happens when you have some really successful Muslims sometimes, but they're barely Muslim. And then you have some really successful Muslims, but they're not really operational on an economic or like worldly level at all. And they've gone the other end of the spectrum. But neither of that is the Islamic way. It has to be this holistic package, because that is what our Prophet did. Our Prophet was a man who would yamshi fil aswaq. He would walk in the streets, as the Quran talks about. And this was something that people said, well, that seems really odd. Why would we follow this man who is just like us, who walks in the markets just like us? But the point is that it was a holistic package. The Prophet wasn't this monk, but the Prophet was also not just a warrior. He was also not just a leader or a politician. He was all of those things, and that's what we need to aspire to as well. And then the final thing, before we get into the economic bit, is culture. So we need to be working hard, and your younger brother or sister who's the more arty type, who you're perennially thinking, what a waste of time she or he is, and they're never going to get a job, and they're going to sponge off me for the rest of my life. You should encourage them, and you should entertain them, because that's something that is actually needed in our communities. That's the stuff that actually gets culture and civilization rolling. And then the final thing is, of course, technology and entrepreneurship and the economy. So I think there's a few different aspects to this. The first is that it's not always right for everyone to do this, but entrepreneurship, what does entrepreneurship mean? Any ideas? It's not a trick question. I'm quite happy with uncomfortable silences, by the way.
Taking risk,
Go on.
could be taking risks or trying something new.
Yeah, in what context?
With like some kind of business context, something that can be made commercial,
Hmm.
be viable.
So I think it's about owning something. So if you identify a need and like essentially a customer who has that need, and then you can figure out a solution and then owning that product, whether inside a company or
Fantastic.
startup or something like that.
Yeah, brilliant.
I was going to say it's just down to problem solving. So whether it's for like a corporate setting or you go for like a social enterprise, like the heart of it is just finding a problem and solving it for its respective community or target audience.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So I think all of you are right. And if I jump off the back of what you just said, we're all going to be working on, we're going to percolate down to things that really add value to the world. And that's because that's the stuff that then ultimately allows us to get paid. And there are two ways with which we approach those things, those real big problems. Either we're going to be the one who has an idea about how to solve that problem and you will end up leading it or being the entrepreneur, or you will get hired by someone who is working on an interesting problem and you will help them solve that problem as well, and you will buy into that problem as well. And what we need to make sure we're doing as a community, and this is again where it goes back to the Korean example, the US example, the Israeli example, the German example, is we need to be focusing on solving real problems and the biggest problems, because the harder the problem is, the more value you're going to be able to generate out of it. So I suspect the founders of OpenAI are doing quite well for themselves right now. And I suspect, and in fact I know, that the founders of people like Amazon or Samsung or Google or Facebook are doing pretty well for themselves. Or even the CEOs of HSBC or Barclays, because these are companies, these are groupings of people who have genuinely solved a problem that the world has. And they've solved it really well, and we benefit all from it. And so entrepreneurship, and this is a kind of open challenge to you folk, is test it out. It might not be for you, and that's perfectly fine as well. But if it is for you, then you should roll the dice and you should give it a go. It is hard work, it is stressful, you need to have a certain skill set for it, but the more entrepreneurs that we can have in our community, the more value is created in our community. Because let's say you've got a salaried profession. What's the most what's the best salaried profession out there? The third years will know this now, after doing their research. What? Quant. Yeah, okay, so the finance, city, was that a scratching? Okay, go on. What?
Like investment banking.
Investment banking, yeah, okay, cool. Any other thoughts? Consulting, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's all the stuff in the city, right? Investment banking, consulting, buy side, investments and finance. Law is another one. If you stay in these professions, you're going to make a decent amount of money, right? That's at the higher end of what a salaried profession can achieve. You're probably going to, I was doing the projections on it a few days ago, having left the city. You probably end up, by the age of 60 or so, you should end up somewhere between 10 and 30 million pounds. If you don't end up with that, you've probably done something wrong, or you've left. And now you might think, okay, so maybe I should just gun for that. And for some people, if they're really interested in it, you should. But the difference between that and entrepreneurship is that an entrepreneur, in law or in investment banking, it kind of goes up like that, and it kind of plateaus, and then you just earn and earn and earn for a period of time. Whereas as an entrepreneur, you start down here, and you might go down here below the line, and you might stay there for a while. Then you might get back to here and continue here, and your investment banker friend is now smashing it, and he's driving, give me a good car name, Lotus. He's like driving a Lotus. It's not my fault. Kabzi wants to buy a Lotus. He's driving a Lotus, and you're still stuck on your Toyota Prius. I actually have a Toyota Prius. It got stolen by the government. Now that's a separate story, because I didn't pay my taxes apparently. So you've got this scenario where investment banker is smashing it, and you are still down in the dumps. But then what's going to happen is, hopefully, it could end up going to zero, by the way, that's the risk of entrepreneurship, but hopefully it does well, and then you go, ooh, and your investment banker friend is left down here because he's capped out. And this is the value that is created from taking risks. And you can only do that, you can only have a shot at that if A, you're the right kind of person, B, you have a good idea and you have an opportunity, but then C, most importantly, you actually step out onto the pitch and you do something about it. And we need a lot more of those in the world, because if you just stack up a lot more of those, that's going, and if you have, let's say you have 100 entrepreneurs and let's say 70 of them fail, the 30 that do this are going to be far, far more valuable than 100 investment bankers for the economy. So that's kind of why entrepreneurship is so important. And then we've got the overlay of technology. So why is technology so important in all of this discussion? Any thoughts? What's so special about technology? Maybe.
That is like a tool that we all are using to make, like, run our daily life, to run our business, to run our homes, to run our cars. So that's like a basic necessity that has become nowadays.
Yeah, okay.
It's changing the nature of a lot of the work that's actually happening.
Yeah, brilliant, okay.
If you look at empires, how empires change over time. When the Ottoman Empire became powerful, it was technology that let them do that because of the island and stuff. So if you want to excel in the future, you need technology to be there for you to be able to innovate and then succeed as either economy or an empire or whatever you want to be.
Brilliant, okay. Ladies, you'll be very quiet. What do we think? Technology. Why is technology important? I know, I'll pick on someone. I am going to pick on you in the black hijab.
I guess it's the way the world works. It's like you guys said before, it's just how everything happens, how communication happens, it's the mechanism for everything.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so it's like it's the enabling layer, right? That's really interesting. There's a hand up right at the back. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, reach and scalability.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So all of these things are exactly. Go on, last one.
Yes, I think if you look at how much time you spend and how much production you create for that time, there are very few things that can actually increase that. And when we increase in technology, we can actually change for the amount of time you use, you can create a lot more produce. So
amazing. Yeah, brilliant. And I did this lecture just before COVID, and I said that you should be investing in real assets. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, in impact investing. So invest in things, stocks and shares or property or something, because that's pretty bulletproof. And I also said you should look into AI and make sure that you're specializing in that as a profession. And if you'd listened to me, and frankly, if I'd listened to myself, we'd have done quite well as a result of that. My advice at this stage is, on the investment side, pretty much exactly the same. It is investing in enterprise, investing in real things, investing in as early as you can into the wave as possible whilst adjusting for risk. And I'll answer questions if you don't understand what that meant towards the end. And then on the technology side is exactly the same thing, because what we're seeing right now, and we obviously invest through IFG and Curate Capital in a lot of early stage tech startups. So we've been investing in AI and other emerging technologies for several years now. And then it gets into the public conscious, and then everyone is jumping onto it. But now there is a new wave of things that are in the idea, innovation world, right, at the moment, which haven't really come to the fore. There's inklings of it, but it hasn't really fully exploded yet. And that's the kind of stuff that you guys need to focus on, right? So the kind of stuff that we're talking about is quantum mechanics and quantum computing and quantum physics, all of that kind of cluster of things. The kind of stuff that we're talking about is the next things that are coming as a result of the applications of AI. Like, are there things that are going to be made possible that weren't not just 10 times faster, but that just fundamentally change our behavior as a human civilization. Like Google was a meaningless word back in the 1915. If you said Google and the concept of Google, it just wouldn't be clear to people. But that was enabled by all of the technology that came thereafter. If you said to someone in the 1500s that you're going to have a thing that is a bit like a horse, but it's going to have wheels and it's going to go really fast and it's going to go by itself, they would look at you like a madman, right? But going from a horse to a car was not just a better horse; it's a different thing, and we're going to see other things that are going to come. Maybe other iterative things on cars, but then something entirely different. Teleportation, right? Teleportation is something in the genre of transport, but it's something completely different that will enable and unlock a whole bunch of other things. So I'd love for you guys to focus on these kind of technologies. In the medical space, there are huge amounts of innovations that are happening and progress that's happening in that space, particularly around genes and the ability to see right down granularly and drug discovery. There's a whole area of research going on there. Basically, there are a whole bunch of opportunities out there for those who are willing to seize it. And this stuff moves really fast. OpenAI, ChatGPT, has come like a blink, and it's just part and parcel of our lives these days. But it's actually only 2 years old. It's several years older than that, but it's 2 years in the public kind of eye, right? I would love for you guys to be jumping onto what was OpenAI and ChatGPT back in 2014. And then you have to spend 3-4 years just clinging onto something, knowing that you are right on it, and then eventually it will pop, and you will see that that industry or that area flourish. And that's where we go back to the investment banker example and the risk taker example. That's the bit where you start accelerating away because you were positioned right and you took that risk. And then the final point around technology is scale. So we want to create as much value as possible. And in order for us to create as much value as possible, we need to set up whatever it is that we do for enormous amounts of scale. We need to be thinking not in terms of, we're going to be the best thing in Coventry, or we're going to be best in the UK. We need to be thinking about we're going to be the best in certainly the world, possibly even the galaxy. Right? And you might say, okay, that's a bit mad. But then you look at how Richard Branson and Bezos and Elon Musk are all involved in this space race at the moment. And that's a really, I think it speaks more to them as individuals, where they're trying to, reach to the edges of where human beings can operate or have operated. And they want to get to that point. And so scale is really, really vital. So whenever you're thinking about something, think about that in mind. And then finally, investments. So many of you will not become entrepreneurs, and that's perfectly cool. And there's a really, entrepreneurship is not the be-all and the end-all of anything. And you can achieve Jannatul Firdaus without, being an entrepreneur. And so the metrics of success are very different. And for many of you, what you will be doing in your economic life is you will be earning money, and then you will be hopefully saving some of it or investing some of it. And what you are doing there, if you do that cleverly, if you do that sensibly and thoughtfully, you can actually unlock not just profits for yourself, but you can actually unlock a lot of potential for good. And what I mean by that is the following. So right now, what happens is that some of our money is, Muhammad, the rent seeker, is sat over here, and he's parked his money in a bank account, not really doing very much, a little bit of financing going on, allowing people to buy a few houses. Okay, so that's fine, but it's not that productive. Whereas Salman, right? Salman, who sat in Silicon Valley, is investing in all sorts of things, and he's creating real value. So you should be, as investors, you should be trying to tilt as much as you can towards things that have real value in the world, so enterprise. So that could be by investing in stocks and shares, it could be by investing in venture capital, it could be by investing in private equity. And don't worry if these terms don't mean anything to you. Basically, it means investing in businesses in various different forms. And if you do that, in a way that actually helps the Muslim community ideally, that's even better. Because right now what happens is that we are investing in sharia-compliant fund. That fund is 99% sat in the S&P 500. And so your money, which is halal, is going all the way over to Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and other companies in the USA primarily, which is fine. It is sharia compliant, but as a net transfer of wealth, like, what are we doing? That money really should be reinvested into our own community as much as possible. And that's on us to be able to facilitate that. Because if you go back to the slides right at the top, the largest 200 companies in the world, if we actually want to invest in some of the largest companies in the world, there aren't that many options that are fully sharia compliant or from Muslim countries. And so this is where entrepreneurship comes in once again, right? We need to create the kind of businesses that actually get to that level. But the point I'm driving at here, folks, is that with your investments, incline towards enterprise and growth, because that's going to make you more money and it's going to be more impactful. Incline to things that are helping the Muslim ecosystem, the Islamic ecosystem, as much as possible, and invest in things that are solving real problems. So rather than engaging in just pure rent seeking, putting your money into a savings account, invest it in things that are going to be productive and useful for society, because that's it's just better, right? It's the Islamic way. You are khairun nas man yanfa'un nas. The best of people is those who is the most beneficial to people. So we should be keeping that in mind. I actually don't know what's coming next. Let me have a look. Okay, so this is where I talk a little bit about how we have applied it at IFG. So thinking about the economic bit, because that's where I am, and that's where I'm focused. And thinking about now, hands up who's in their third year? Is there fourth years? All right, flying the flag. Second years? You're the chilling guys, right? And then first year? All right, fantastic. So this period of time at university is a really central period of time to your life where you figure out what you want to do with it a lot of the time. And I'm going to share with you how I thought about what we do today and how it played out, because then hopefully that can influence how you think about things as well. If you remember nothing else from today, then remember this, that your career should be focused on those things that are going to help the Muslim community the most. It should not be something that you just fall into because Goldman Sachs turned up at the career fair. That is not a good reason for working for any company. You need to be first principles about it. And you might be wrong about it because you're young and naive and you don't have complete knowledge about everything. But the point is that you need to try and control your destiny. You need to ask yourself, what am I good at? What is there a need for in the world? And what do I like doing? So what am I good at? What is there a need for in the world? And what do I like doing? And you draw 3 circles and you see in the middle, what's the thing in the middle? Because that's the thing that you really should be gunning for, and you should be gunning for possibly for the rest of your life. And then you really work at that thing. And that will set you apart immediately on your career because it will give you purpose. Most people, when they think about their career, this is how it works. I am an economics student at Warwick. I have seen what other people are doing. They are applying to investment banking. Therefore, I am going to go to these evenings, wear a suit, and network with HR people. I mean, what's that all about? So you're networking with HR people, and then I'm going to apply because I'm told that money is a good thing, and I'm going to apply and make lots of money. I've done a stint at Citi, I've done a stint at Deutsche. I hated it, but I have told myself that I like it. And it is a good thing to do. It looks good on my CV, and therefore that is something that I should do. And so then I go ahead and I apply and I get in. And I do a 2-year stint where I'm paid well, but treated not so well. And then I realize that actually, I don't really have any other options. It seems the pathway is clear here, which is I can just carry on, or maybe I can go to a private equity fund. And then I just continue this for the next 7 years, with each year my salary getting larger and larger. I get married, I lose my hair, I have a husband or a wife and kids at this point. And then I realized that, hang on a second, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm here, and I can't really reverse out of this now because I've got a mortgage and a wife or a husband, I don't know, who likes Chanel bags. I mean, that might be a bit weird, but so you've got that kind of, that baggage. And that's how a normal career plays out. That is actually how a normal career plays out. That is not, purposeful. That is not first principles thinking. So don't do that. And it might be that you do ultimately end up in, the city. That's perfectly fine. But at least do it, in a purposeful way, so you know why you're going in, when you're going to be getting out, why you're getting out, and what you're going to be doing there, and why you're doing it as well, and how that 30-40% of your life that you're going to be spending in your vocation is going to get you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how that's going to get you closer to getting into Jannah. Because if you don't have those answers, then what are you playing at, right? So moving on. So what we do around the economic side was we thought, okay, there's this, really mathematically, there's this gap between the Muslim community and everyone else of about 5 times, 15,000, 16,000 and 80,000. How are we going to bridge that gap? And we experimented, we did a whole bunch of things, and what we found was ultimately there are 2 high leverage things that we can do. The first is education, so things like this. Hopefully you will have taken away at least something from this talk, and then you will do stuff about it. So this is quite a high leverage interaction that we can have that helps move our mission forward. Because Salman over here, if he now creates the next Reddit, my job here is done, guys. And hopefully we can have a few people who do something like that. So that's education. Education is really important, and that can help narrow the financial gap. And then we've got investments, actually facilitating investments for people. So it's telling the 90% of you who are going to go into salaried jobs that this is how you should be investing, and then facilitating that so that we can take the money off you and give it to Salman, who is then going to go ahead and hopefully create a lot of value for us, and then everyone's going to become more prosperous, and then everyone's going to get that money, and then we're going to back Muhammad over here, and he might fail, but he might succeed, and then the whole virtuous cycle carries on. So if we carry on forward, I don't need to, we've got a book. I don't know why I put the book in there. And then we've got our journey. So the other, and I'll probably wrap up with the journey. So as you can see, and I was reflecting on this myself earlier today, there's a lot of very straight lines that are parallel to the, the x-axis? What's the one at the bottom? The x-axis, isn't it? So there's a lot of time spent very near the x-axis, and then eventually things start clicking, and you start going towards the y-axis. Oh well, not the y. You start going up the y-axis, and so if I think back how the career played out, a lot of the stuff that ultimately was successful for me in my career was stuff that I just stuck at for a long period of time when it was when other people wouldn't. So the blog, IFG the blog, started in 2015, and today it's got, I think we reach about 4 million or so people per month. Have a guess at 2019, how many subscribers did we have? January 2019, how many subscribers did we have?
500.
Yeah, it was 500. I think it might have been 350 actually, but yeah, it was like 350 to 500. So that's how many we had. And then of course it accelerated after that. So the point that I'm making is that for all of you guys, have something that you're deeply passionate about, and I know it's easy to say, but there will be stuff that really moves you. There'll be stuff that you're really interested in. Stick at it, and stick at it for a long, long period of time, because it will come up trumps. In the end, a lot of the time, it is just about holding on. The person who holds on for the longest has built in the deepest roots that then allows them to flourish on top of that. The other thing I would say is, so how I thought about my career was, I met my co-founder Mohsin at university, and we both decided we want to do something in Islamic finance. So we did a master's in Islamic finance, and so we were not really clear about exactly where we're going to end up, but we were heading in that direction. And we thought, all right, let's go into law, because that will teach us a little bit more about Islamic finance structuring, but then there's also optionality to exit and do other things. So that's where we ended up. And at this point, we started doing IFG as well, and also funding plays and creating a beard balm oil, which did not so well. And so then we continued experimenting, but we went into law knowing that we were going to leave law and that we were going to do something of our own. And that's not, you might go into law knowing that you're going to stay in law forever, and that's cool as well. But at each step, I think the one thing that we did right, we did many things that were wrong, but the one thing that we did right was we had an end goal. It's quite a simple thing. We had an end goal and we were working towards it. And it was like maybe 6 months ahead or 9 months or 12 months ahead, but we had a goal and we were working towards it. And what that does from just like a purely philosophical level is you've got level 1, level 2, level 3. If you don't have a goal that is a level 3 or 4 goal, you will just meander. You could go sideways, you might go to level 2, but you might not, because you don't have a goal. You're just there for the banter. What you actually need is a goal at level 4, because you might not get there, but your impetus is upwards. So you'll get to level 1, you might get to level 2, you might get to level 3, and you might get to level 4 over here. And your goal was over that, it was level 4 over here. But the point is, it's still level 4. And you get there because you have that impetus and the end goal in mind. So I suppose wrapping it all up, how do we as individuals and how do we as a community get back to where we can and should be? We do that by getting the 4 quadrants right personally, and then the 4 quadrants right as a community. Politically, economically, spiritually, and culturally. We should probably pick one of those areas that we are particularly passionate about, and ultimately we should specialize in that area, and we should contribute as much as we can that benefits us, but most importantly benefits the community as a whole. And if we all do that with all of our skill sets, and we do that with sincere intention, then I'm hopeful that in the next, few hundred years, or maybe even 50 years, if the tech cycle goes in our direction, we will help the Ummah get back to its former financial glory. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.
Economic progress, a valid metric for society's success. The West created existential threats from technology and prioritized materialism over spirituality. So is this like a valid metric to look at ourselves and reflect on ourselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the answer is no. It's not on its own a valid criteria. Ultimately, as I said, the real thing that we're trying to get to is Jannah, and that means that we are trying to serve the Almighty in how He would like to be served. And that really comes down to fulfilling the 5 pillars, doing salah, zakah, sawm, hajj, the basics, but then also being a good citizen of the world, and and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks a lot about society and family and economic transactions and trade. He doesn't really at any point say that you should be rich or you should be poor, but the ahadith do talk about a few things. How the Prophet was a businessman, and he wasn't in business to make a loss. He was in business to make a profit. There are hadith about how there are people that you could and should be envious of because they have a lot of wealth and then they give that wealth away. There are the second or the first, sorry, even possibly the first or second thing the Prophet did when he came to Medina was he established a market. And so I don't think that our religion is silent in any way, shape or form about money and about making money. Money is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And there are multiple threads in society, right? And in the economic thread, even though it is not, as I said, the end in itself, one of the key metrics or the yardstick when it comes to economics is money and finance and GDP and value creation. That's just the nature of the beast. And so to say that if someone accelerates in that and creates a huge amount of value but hasn't got anything to show for in any of the other areas, then of course that's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does want for people to strive towards ihsan and to strive towards being the best in each of those areas. And I would say that it just needs to be taken as a package.
And we have a question about entrepreneurship. So if I'm someone who thinks that they don't have the skills to become an entrepreneur, how do you find out if this is the case whilst minimizing the risk?
Kabzi, how do we do that?
I didn't listen to that question.
So it's really simple. Give it a go. Just give it a go. It's the scientific method, right? You run the experiment and you see what comes back. From a qualities of an individual perspective, it's really hard to say what makes a good or bad entrepreneur. But some people are naturally entrepreneurial. They like to buy and sell things as kids. They like to, they like sales. They like being able to convince people. Some people like to make things. That's their entrepreneurial thing. It really varies. Give it a go, and give it a go a few times, and then you'll know if you want to do it or not.
That's good. How can we educate ourselves more on this topic? What books can we read? Speakers can we listen to?
On entrepreneurship specifically? So I think there's some really good books. 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, Blitzscaling by Reid Hoffman. There's a book by the guy Tony Fadell. I can't remember the name of the book, but Tony Fadell's got a really good book on this. I think if you're actually in the nitty-gritty of building a business, then there's probably 2 books that are very helpful. 4 Steps to the Epiphany. So this is a product book for tech startups. Pitch Anything by Oren something is a really good book on sales. And then there is a book about Marty something, I think his name is, on product. I think if you search Inspired, I think is one of the names of the books. There's another book as well that he's written. So yeah, the books on product by that guy.
You left the best one now.
What's that?
Subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Yeah, of course. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. And we do actually at some point want to do accelerators and things like that via Curate. So yeah, watch out for those as well.
And should Muslims be solving Muslim-specific issues, or is it fine if they solve just general issues, or should they prioritize Islamic issues?
I think you should actually prioritize just general issues, because that's what creates the most value. I know it's rich coming from someone who runs a company called Islamic Finance Guru, but that's what you should focus on, because they're the bigger problems.
Sounds good. Is wealth the optimal path to supporting the rise of Muslims, or should we seek power through politics? Or is there an optimal path that everyone should try their own?
This is like trying to come up with an equation that solves the world, and that's not really possible. So I would say that to each their own. I'm sure that in and amongst us we have some budding politician who has, run for the student union and is the guy or girl who's doing the petitions and all of that stuff, and that's great. That's you're politically inclined. Go ahead, crack on, do that. And the same for each of those areas. Someone who's very academic and wants to go into academia, great. So play to your strengths and play in the area that you feel most comfortable with, that you're going to make the most contribution to.
As a third year, and kind of like as all of us now graduate, we'll be going to a lot of roles, particularly in the city, and a lot of us sometimes have that belief that we should kind of start something. But I think it kind of dawns upon us that we don't know when to start something, whether to start it after university, 2 years after university, or when the opportunity might arise. So I ask you, how do you find the time, or maybe the opportunity, the right opportunity, to pursue, and especially in an environment where maybe you want to get, in a certain geographical environment as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question of timing. There is really no right or wrong answer to this. Sometimes the thing just presents itself, and you just have to be willing to say yes. There's a film called, I think it's just called Yes Man. So that's a great film because he just says yes a lot. And then the moral of the film is that you say yes mostly to things, but then you also say no to things, which I think is a stupid moral. Although the first half of it was great, you just say yes to loads and loads of things. So yeah, take opportunities, because there's opportunities all around us at all times. So we just need to invite them in. A more practical point would be after university is a great period of time when you've got 1 to 2 years, no responsibilities, no one really cares about you. You probably aren't married. You don't have any, kids that you know of, and you're rocking around, and you can take advantage of life. And that's when you can have like a big effort and create try and create a company that works. And if it does work, fantastic. And if it doesn't work, then you haven't lost out at all, and you can go back into strategy consulting or wherever else you end up. So that period of time just after university, I think, is really powerful. And to give you a really concrete example of that, 3 friends of mine, they exited their company a couple of weeks ago for over 400 million. And they did exactly this. They came out of university at exactly the same time as me, and they decided to go down this path. And they created this company that does ID verification checking with selfie checking. And it takes that long, and they took that risk, and it worked out for them. So it's worth you taking that risk. I've seen other people who taken that risk, and it hasn't worked out. But because they've taken it early, it doesn't really affect them too much. It gives them a lot of life lessons, a lot of skill sets, a lot of networks, and then you carry on with your career, and you can have another go. Now, in our case, what we did was we I think ended up tooling up a lot for what we were doing. So what we do today requires a lot of funds law, Islamic law, commercial awareness. It needs that financial management and wealth management experience, and all of that, without really having intended it, was what we were doing in the first 10 years of our careers. So the other way to do it is to very purposefully say, all right, by the age of my late 20s, or certainly by 30, I'm going to decide and have a go. There's no age that's too late, frankly, but that could be another way that you decide to do it. But the risk of going down this path is, at that point, it becomes a lot harder to leave the thing that you're doing and go into it, because your risk appetite goes down because you have a family.
Actually asked my question about whether technology is a good metric for society, and so thanks for answering that. This question is in a similar theme, which is it even possible to compete with the West technologically without compromising on our ethical values, because the West's growth is exponential compared to any other time period, but you could argue it has come at the cost of a lack of spirituality. And if I may, just a couple of examples of this. Number one, developing, whether it's nuclear weapons, technology which has led to global warming, to the harms at the micro level of social media, for example, all technology related. Number two, technological growth and entrepreneurship has been financed by debt, especially when, Jacob Fugger in the 16th century basically convinced the Pope to legalize usury, and most entrepreneurial ventures are financed by debt. Number three, to facilitate growth, kind of the West have been sucked into this consumerist mentality. Even the education system over the centuries has gone from religious to the classics to spend on business studies. So kind of these things the West has done, kind of at the compromise of our morality to facilitate growth. Can you compete with that?
Can we do it in an ethical way? I'm not even sure if it's even a competition. So I know it was framed as this is a competition with the West. I don't think this is a competition with the West. This is us trying to be the best version of ourselves that we can be, and do what we think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would want us to do. And I think ultimately technology is fundamentally agnostic. And I think that how we use that technology, what we turn that technology to, decides whether or not it's ethical or not. And I know I've kind of talked about how we're living in unprecedented times, but the reality is that technologies and big seismic shifts in technologies have come and gone many times over the centuries, and there are unethical uses of it, and then there are ethical uses of that same technology. So you have people who used the paper to spread lies, and then you had people who wrote academic treatises that were relied on for the research that people did. In terms of the financial point, so I agree with you. I think that our setup, our economic system as a whole, our monetary system is deeply corrupt and unequal and structurally problematic because of its reliance on debt and interest. So I agree and accept all of those points. I think as an entrepreneur, you just play the game on the pitch. But if you are someone who is perhaps like me, interested in finance and trying to solve these kind of problems, someone needs to try and solve those kind of problems as well. Are there alternatives to interest-based banking or interest-based finance? And come up with those alternatives, and hopefully that's what we are doing at Curate Capital in particular, and make that happen. But I don't think that's a reason why you say, okay, no, I'm not going to compete or go into the field. And then the third point around consumerism, so I didn't fully follow the point, but I guess what I understood from it was that we have created, this is maybe me strongmanning it, we have created like a atomized society that is really focused on the self, and we've got this Lockean concept of rights going on, and that is what we care about. We don't really care about community as a value, or we don't really care about society as a whole. And so this prism of this kind of utilitarian, libertarian kind of prism that we see the world means that we have become naturally inclined towards this like maximizing, ethic, and as a result of that, we are chasing the wrong thing. We are playing the wrong game, and I would say that's probably true. I think that's right. I think we do live in a society where all of those things are true, but I think it starts at the family level, and it starts there. So where we can make sure that we've got our relationships with our parents and our spouses and our children and our community right, and we are investing time in those things, then we are doing the exact opposite of what this atomized society that doesn't know their neighbor would want or is pushing to. We're fighting, against the dying of the light by doing that. So yeah, I don't think that's a particularly coherent answer on the last point, but yeah, those are my general thoughts.
You mentioned a topic where things that fundamentally change like society as a whole and in terms of technology. So I wanted your opinions on like where to use blockchain and what do you think they mean in terms of like fundamentally changing society over a period of time.
I think blockchain as a technology has value. I think it's possibly a little bit overstated. And I think that the big value that blockchain has or had, probably twofold. One is, as a system of recording information that is decentralized, I think has lots of interesting applications. Does it revolutionize the world? Probably not. I think what it probably does do is it has the potential to revolutionize the monetary system as a whole. But the problem with that is that the monetary system, the pound coin or the King Charles or Queen Elizabeth that we have on our £10 note gets value because of the value that you and I imbue within it. And we give that value because it is backed up by military power, it is backed up by the police. And I realize, this goes back to my road tax incident. So my car got, I thought, stolen, but actually got towed by the government. And they towed it because they said I'd cancelled my 0.88p direct debit that I'd set to pay my road tax, and I didn't realize it was what I was cancelling. And so because of that, the government stole my car. So the point I'm making is the government is the sovereign. It is the mafia, but it's the only mafia that we put up with. And I was thinking, if someone else stole my car, I would go to the police. But here the police is turning around and saying, no, cough up, pay 100 quid and then we'll give you your car back. So the pound coin or the £10 note that we have is given value because it is backed up by a sovereign, by the government mafia. And also because it is accepted as legal tender in this society, but particularly by the taxman, by HMRC, which is why I took their call as well. Where was I going with this? So the monetary system, blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies have the potential to revolutionize that space, but the challenge they have is that money isn't in isolation of technology, it's a technology backed up by a sovereign. And that's where they run into problems, as we've seen with some of the most prominent examples of cryptocurrency. Having said that, I have actually invested in it was the maddest investment thesis ever. So a friend of mine is a big crypto fund manager, and so he gave me his thesis that Buterin, who's the founder of Ethereum, has 2 cats. I thought this is the start of a fantastic investment thesis. One cat is called He-Mule, and the other cat is called Tigra. And so He-Mule had a cryptocurrency named after her, and then it went to the moon. And Tigra also has a cryptocurrency named after her, but it has not yet gone to the moon. And so therefore you should invest in Tigra. So I thought this made perfect sense. And so I've invested a very small amount of money into that. I don't know why I shared that, but I am a believer in cryptocurrency at some level.
Cool. Perfect. Last question from the sister, and then we'll head out for some more conversations.
Because I'm doing biomedical science, so I want to get into academia, and I can see myself getting into academia. I was wondering, like with academia, how do you really get into entrepreneurship with it as well? Like let's say drug discovery. If I do spend a lot of time with like the specific research, if I do want to build something as a product, it's usually like under bigger companies anyway. So like Pfizer, like Johnson & those. So like how do we specialize in academia and also put entrepreneurship in that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've got friends so one of our companies that exited was founded by a professor of drug discovery. And she spun up this startup and then ultimately created the technology that then got bought out by another larger company. and then we've recently invested in a company called Sahal.ai, which uses artificial intelligence and the ability to listen in on conversations between doctors and patients and transcribe the notes, but then also create automated records, medical records from that conversation, which is quite revolutionary, because then you can use that to automate prescriptions, and you can use that to automate all sorts of other things. Then you've got this deep pool of information about patients, which you can mine using AI to do all sorts of other interesting stuff. Anyway, the point I'm making is he was also a researcher. So he was a doctor, but then he was also a researcher. So there's a really strong tie between research and creating new technologies, and then looking to try and commercialize that. And at this point in time, my advice to you would be to get exposure to some startups that have been on this path, because there'll 100% be loads around you, and just maybe work at one of these startups and get some sense of how these journeys work. What are the playbooks? And we've invested in some companies that have spun out of universities as well. So you get a lot of support in university, through the incubation process that they offer. So, the bottom line is keep your eyes open for opportunities. Try and align yourself and learn from some other people, and where there is the potential to do something entrepreneurial with your particular research, then keep an eye on that. Like if I went back into research today, obviously I'm not from a medical background, so I would probably think about particularly quantum computing. I think that's going to be a massive leap forward. So positioning myself in and around that space would be really interesting for me. And I'm sure similarly there'll be areas that there's a lot of promise and a lot of talk, but no one's ever really done it in your field as well. And that's where you want to be positioning yourself.